Imagine a vital artery connecting two parts of a country, a lifeline that not only carries people and goods, but also represents the deep ties between neighbors. This is the reality for the highways that link the continental United States to Alaska, passing through the vast Canadian wilderness. For decades, these routes have been more than just roads. They've been symbols of cooperation, trust, and shared prosperity between the US and Canada. Now picture that artery suddenly restricted by a foreign power, with barriers and roadblocks halting the steady flow of traffic. Overnight, what was once a seamless journey has become fraught with uncertainty and frustration. In a surprising move, Canada has imposed new rules on land routes through its territory, sharply limiting access to Alaska from the lower 48 states. These regulations affect not just casual travelers, but anyone who relies on these roads for work, family, or essential services. The impact is immediate and widespread. Thousands of Americans, military families stationed in Alaska, long-haul truckers delivering vital goods, and tourists seeking adventure, now face delays, uncertainty, and increased costs. For many, these new restrictions disrupt daily life and upend carefully laid plans, creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond the border itself. At the heart of the dispute are the main highways that wind through British Columbia and the Yukon. These roads are not just scenic byways, they are essential arteries for trade, tourism, and military movement, connecting remote communities and supporting local economies on both sides of the border. Canada's new restrictions have created a major bottleneck, turning what was once a routine crossing into a logistical nightmare. What began as a regional issue has quickly escalated, drawing national attention and transforming a practical problem into an international flashpoint. Former President Donald Trump has weighed in, calling the restrictions a hostile act, and framing the issue as one of national pride and economic fairness. His statements have amplified public concern, fueling debate and raising the stakes for both governments. With his rhetoric, a practical border management issue has become a symbol of broader tensions between two close allies. The dispute now stands as a test of diplomatic resolve and the strength of the US-Canada partnership. This incident highlights how quickly disagreements can surface over shared infrastructure, especially when national priorities diverge. What seems like a simple policy change can expose deeper differences in values, security concerns, and economic interests. Canada cites sovereign reasons for the new rules, emphasizing its right to control its borders and protect its interests. Yet, the consequences are felt most acutely by American citizens and businesses, who find themselves caught in the crossfire of international policy decisions. The situation underscores the complexities of international cooperation. Even between friendly nations, domestic decisions can have immediate and sometimes unintended cross-border impacts, requiring careful negotiation and mutual understanding to resolve. Ultimately, this border dispute is more than a logistical hiccup. It's a test of diplomacy, resilience, and the ability of two nations to navigate challenges together. The outcome will shape not only the future of cross-border travel but also the broader relationship between the United States and Canada for years to come. Canada justifies the new transit restrictions by citing environmental protection and Indigenous rights. According to government officials, these measures are not arbitrary, but rather a response to growing concerns about the impact of cross-border traffic on fragile northern landscapes and the rights of First Nations communities. The government emphasizes that the decision was made after extensive consultations with environmental experts and Indigenous leaders, aiming to address long-standing issues that have often been overlooked in the past. Officials argue the highways to Alaska cut through sensitive ecosystems and First Nations territories, where increased vehicle traffic can disrupt wildlife habitats, pollute waterways, and threaten the cultural heritage of Indigenous peoples who have lived on these lands for generations. Limiting traffic, they say, is necessary to safeguard both the environment and the rights of Indigenous communities, ensuring that these areas remain protected for future generations. Legally, Canada has the right to regulate transit for environmental stewardship, drawing on both national laws and international agreements that prioritize conservation and Indigenous sovereignty. Honoring Indigenous land claims is central to this policy, reflecting Canada's commitment to reconciliation and the recognition of Indigenous self-determination. The government insists these measures are temporary, not punitive, and are designed to allow time for further study and dialogue with all stakeholders involved. These actions also reflect a broader shift toward sustainability and reconciliation as Canada seeks to lead by example in balancing economic interests with environmental and social responsibilities. While the U.S. faces immediate disruption and inconvenience, Canada's position is rooted in long-term objectives, protecting its natural resources and upholding its commitments to Indigenous peoples. The dispute is about more than road access. It's a clash of policy priorities, with each nation defending its own values and interests on the international stage. For Canada, protecting the environment is not just a policy choice but a moral responsibility to future generations and to the planet. Honoring Indigenous communities and their traditions now outweighs the convenience of cross-border transit, marking a significant shift in national priorities. This decision demonstrates how domestic values and internal policy shifts can have significant international consequences, affecting diplomatic relations and economic ties. The challenge now is finding a balance between national responsibility and international cooperation, as both countries navigate the complexities of shared borders and mutual interests. Donald Trump has seized on Canada's restrictions, turning a diplomatic issue into a political rallying cry. He's accused Prime Minister Trudeau of hostility and threatened retaliatory tolls on Canadian goods. Trump's approach energizes his base, framing the dispute as another example of foreign countries taking advantage of the U.S. His rhetoric complicates diplomatic efforts, making compromise harder to achieve. By personalizing the conflict, Trump keeps the issue in the spotlight and hardens positions on both sides. This intervention shows how domestic politics can inflame international relations. The dispute becomes a battle of wills, not just a policy disagreement. The result, a more volatile diplomatic environment overshadowed by political drama. In contrast to the often dramatic and headline-grabbing political theatrics that can dominate international news, the current U.S. administration is taking a measured, pragmatic approach to the situation. Rather than escalating tensions or resorting to public posturing, American leaders are choosing to work quietly and methodically behind the scenes, focusing on practical solutions over political grandstanding. American and Canadian officials are deeply engaged in ongoing quiet negotiations. Their goal is to find a balanced solution that restores access and addresses the concerns of both nations, all while respecting Canadian sovereignty and the unique relationship the two countries share. These talks are marked by mutual respect and a shared understanding of the importance of cooperation. Canada, for its part, maintains that the current restrictions are strictly temporary measures, rooted in domestic policy decisions and public health considerations, not in any form of hostility or antagonism toward its neighbor. Canadian officials have repeatedly emphasized their commitment to resolving the issue in a way that is fair and reasonable for all parties involved. Both governments continue to emphasize the enduring importance of their alliance. They are working diligently to prevent any long-term damage to the relationship, recognizing that their partnership is built on decades of trust, shared values, and economic interdependence. Diplomats on both sides remain focused on negotiation, not escalation. Their primary aim is to minimize harm to citizens and commerce, ensuring that daily life and cross-border trade can continue with as little disruption as possible. This careful, behind-the-scenes work is essential to maintaining stability. This entire process highlights the remarkable resilience of U.S.-Canada relations and the professionalism of their diplomatic corps. Both nations have a long history of overcoming challenges through dialogue and cooperation, and this situation is no exception. The real work, as always, happens behind closed doors, far from the cameras and the noise of public debate. Here, experienced government staff and diplomats sift through complex issues, separating political noise from practical problem-solving, and laying the groundwork for lasting solutions. Ultimately, the outcome of these talks will serve as a true test of the strength and flexibility of the U.S.-Canada alliance. The world will be watching to see how these two close partners navigate this challenge together. Success in these negotiations depends on both sides finding common ground, making necessary compromises, and doing so without sacrificing their core national interests. It's a delicate balance, but one that both countries are committed to achieving. The stakes are high, not just for access to Alaska, but for the future of cross-border cooperation, trade, and the everyday lives of people who depend on a strong, open relationship between these two nations. The decisions made now will shape the path forward for years to come. The new restrictions hit ordinary people hardest. Military families, truckers, and tourists now face logistical nightmares and uncertainty. Commerce is disrupted. Essential goods and supplies move slower, raising costs and causing delays. Alternative routes like ferries or air travel are expensive and impractical for many. Small towns along the route dependent on travelers are seeing business dry up. Economic anxieties grow, especially with threats of retaliatory tolls. The ripple effects extend beyond travelers, impacting livelihoods on both sides of the border. What was once a routine journey is now a costly, complicated ordeal. As if political disputes weren't enough, wildfires have made travel to Alaska even harder. A massive wildfire in northern British Columbia forced the closure of the Alaska Highway, stranding travelers and cutting off a key route. The Stewart-Cassiar Highway became the only option, causing massive delays. The closure was about safety, not policy, but it exposed the region's vulnerability to natural disasters. Access to Alaska now depends on both political agreements and unpredictable environmental conditions. Travelers must monitor both diplomatic developments and daily fire reports. The convergence of policy restrictions and wildfires creates a perfect storm of challenges. For families and businesses, planning a trip to Alaska has never been more uncertain. This episode is a case study in the complexities of managing the US-Canada border. Disputes over transit, environment, and indigenous rights can quickly escalate, requiring careful diplomacy. Quiet negotiation, not public confrontation, is the preferred path for both governments. Political grandstanding, especially from figures like Trump, makes resolution harder. The strength of the alliance is tested by how problems are solved, not by their absence. The outcome will set a precedent for future cross-border challenges. Even as talks continue, the future of land transit to Alaska remains uncertain. Canada calls the restrictions temporary, but a long-term solution is elusive. The dispute is now a political talking point, ensuring lingering tensions. This episode highlights the deep interconnection and fragility of the US-Canada relationship. The path forward demands patience, diplomacy, and a willingness to compromise. How this conflict is managed will set the tone for future cooperation. The resolution will influence agreements on trade, security, and the environment. The resilience of the alliance is on the line. Canada's restrictions have created a crisis with real consequences: disrupted travel, economic pain, and political drama. The contrast between political rhetoric and diplomatic negotiation reveals a core tension in international relations. Quiet compromise is the goal, but public threats make it harder to achieve. The dispute is more than a logistical problem. It's a test of whether diplomacy can prevail over antagonism. The impacts on families and businesses show how vital open borders are. This episode forces both nations to examine how they manage differences in a changing world. The challenge is balancing sovereignty with shared responsibility. The central question: can the US and Canada build a more resilient partnership for the future?